Hello, and welcome to this lecture entitled Taking Notes for Systematic Success. Note-taking is a basic and critical skill for researchers, and this lecture will give you some techniques and ideas for creating your own note-taking system. Many early career and student researchers believe that they save time and energy by opening their hard copy and online sources and writing directly from them. This strategy actually works if you believe that research is writing up a bunch of précis of your sources and stitching them together so your footnotes contain an occasional full citation followed by a list of subsequent citation. But that's not research at all. It's just repeating things from others before you've critically evaluated them. Note-taking provides multiple advantages to your research and your writing. The first is that note-taking makes it easier to handle information. As we'll see, notes contain discrete points of datum linked to a topical heading and to the source. You can arrange and rearrange the notes, and you can take them at your leisure. Note-taking allows you to incorporate information from multiple sources into your own thinking. By acquiring similar information from more than one source, you stop merely repeating what others have said, and instead, you use that information to support your own claim. You might think of this as spin, but if you do it in order to create new knowledge, even if that knowledge is new only to you, it's the core of what research is all about. Note-taking lets you deepen your paper. Rather than copying the first piece of appropriate information into that paper, you'll have time to think about it, to merge it with other information, to critically examine and compare it, and to test it against other information. Note-taking allows you to arrange information by topic rather than merely by source. You can do that same thing by opening all your sources, but note-taking makes that a much more deliberate action. And deliberation is the hallmark of an experienced researcher. Note-taking helps you avoid inadvertent plagiarism, and because it deepens your paper and tends to lead to what Turabian calls complex footnotes, that is, footnotes containing multiple citations, it gives your readers confidence that you are sharing expertise in the subject matter, not merely getting finished with a term paper. You might object that you can do all of this without taking notes. I agree that you can, but when you cut some corners, you're likely to cut most corners. Again, note-taking makes research easier. Let's talk now about formatting notes in general. Trust me on this one. You'll be much happier if you develop a template for notes. In a few minutes, we'll look at examples of note cards and digital notes, but right now let's examine what constitutes a template. The template I'll present here is based on the long-lived index card note. Begin your note with a header. Put certain information across its top line. This should be the author short title citation of the note's source. This links you to your working bibliography or your bibliographic cards. Add the page number from where the note information came, and a keyword drawn from your outline or a list of topics that you plan to cover. The gist of the note is in its body. Here you put information about the source author's claim if it's a secondary source. This provides context for your data. Add the data that you're extracting from that source, and add your response or additional ideas, usually distinguished by a consistent mark or format. I place my responses in brackets and open it with my initials, so I'm not confused when I'm rushing toward a deadline or am tired or distracted. End your note card with a footer that contains a ready locator like a library call number or website URL. This makes it more convenient to relocate the source without having to grab your bibliography cards. Now, what about the really vital stuff? The data in the note's body. Scholars recognize three ways to take data from a source: the summary, the paraphrase, and the quotation. The summary is particularly useful for succinctly reducing a paragraph or more of source information into a short note. When summarizing, restate the gist of the material in your own words. Remember that if the source material goes beyond a single book or article page, list the inclusive pages on your note. Summaries are general, so expect to lose some specificity. Paraphrases are more specific, but they are dangerous. In a paraphrase, you restate a small amount of source data in your own words. Unfortunately, it's easy to overly closely paraphrase in a note, then copy that note into your paper, which can be plagiarism. So let yourself know when you've closely paraphrased. I do this in my response to the note, where I might write overly close paraphrase. This alerts me to a potential problem, so I won't copy my note directly into my paper. The best method of note-taking from sources is the direct quotation, enclosed, of course, in quotation marks. By quoting a short passage from a source in your note, you know exactly what the source said, you'll have a quotation available if you need it, and when you see it, you'll not be confused that it's a quotation. You'll also not have to trek back to the original source for the information. I learned that trick from a friend who put a second mortgage on her house so she could go research in France. She had one shot to get the info, so she quoted it. So if you quote the source, why take notes at all? The act of choosing which quotes to take, then writing or typing them, or even copying and pasting them, begins the process by which you make the source's information your own. Now, your notes should be useful. Otherwise, they're just the detritus of your professor insisting that you do some dumb, time-consuming, sterile exercise, and ain't nobody got time for that. Before you use a list of information that's not strictly data, but incorporating it into your notes and into your note-taking practice will make notes work harder for you. First, actively engage your sources. Don't just plunder them for factoids. Remember, scholarly books, articles, and scholarly websites aren't just compendia of data points. The stories they tell and the information they provide are there to support an argument. Knowing what that argument is, its claim, its assertions, how it deploys its evidence, and the structure of the argument lets you put the information you've culled into its proper context. Also, engaging your sources lets you understand that our rhetorical imperatives force authors to curate their own evidence. That is, they leave out as much as they put in. Engaging these sources includes tracking what is missing as well as what's present. Take notes that are relevant to your own hypothesis, that is, your claim and your assertions. You too must curate your information and know what to leave out as well as what to put in. But if you have a good idea of what your argument entails, and this means writing down its components, then you won't be quite as tempted to take a note of everything you read in hopes that you can find a place to jam that piece of information in. Be aware that you can make notes about other authors' interpretations. This is what we call historiography. This is that academic conversation you're trying to fit your own research conclusions into, and the historiography provides ongoing context for your own argument. You also gather information that allows you to put your evidence into the context of the times. That is to say that much of your own research will be narrative or descriptive evidence in support of your central point, your thesis, but you must flesh that out by putting your story into context. Finally, a word of advice. When taking notes, writing your research report, or even when you begin to think about a project, avoid using the truth to tell a lie. Follow the rules of fair argumentation by which you include data that supports your claims and honestly deal with data that refutes or argues against your claim. Also, do not be so willful that you refuse to change your interpretation in the face of new or contrary evidence. Another way to make your notes useful is to arrange them by keyword. I've alluded to this earlier when talking about the information that you should put in the header of individual note cards. Notes as notes are just junk, especially if you have to rummage through them to make your argument. But because notes are discrete and, if on well-made cards, self-contained, you can arrange and rearrange them regardless of their source. This is the most important quality of discrete notes, their ability to be arranged by context and by topic. You designate topics by using keywords derived from your outline or the list of topics you plan to cover. Since you've tagged each note, you can easily sort them into topical areas, then arrange them after the initial sort. To make this most effective, repeat the keywords as exactly as possible. This is particularly true if tagging notes in digital form. Computers don't get the fuzzy difference between a capital letter and a lowercase letter, so your keywords must be precise. This is not to say your notes will fail if you use slightly different keywords, but when taking notes, plan for how you use them as the term wears on and you're tired and stressed. Will you really relish the aggravation of having to deal with varying keywords at 10 p.m. before the 11:59 p.m. deadline? I wager that you will not. As I've said, I've modeled much of the previous discussion on hard copy notes, so now let's look at some examples. Some researchers take notes in notebooks, while others take notes on index cards. During the 20th century, historians turned index cards into the go-to database for taking notes. So even today, our digital note-taking systems still show traces of index card technique. Before the advent of easy-to-use digital note-taking and bibliographic management software, my own practice was built on index cards, and I still have hundreds of them from papers I've written in the 1990s. One word about notebooks. I use notebooks to take notes from sources when other note-taking methods are inconvenient. For example, I once had jury duty and knew that I'd sit for a long time in a waiting room. I took a source, in this case a book, and my notepad. I made a bibliographic notation at the top of each page of notes and placed the page number from whence I got a note in the left-hand margin. Then I took notes from those pages with a line or two in between each. Later, I transferred these notes by rekeying them into my digital note-taking system. Otherwise, I rarely use notebooks for extensive note-taking because I organize those notes by source rather than by topic. But note cards. The note card system requires two different types of cards: bibliography cards and note cards. These differ, and let's look at them. In a pure card system, you make one card for each source from which you draw notes. I found it helpful to put the author's short title form you will use to link the bibliography and note cards at the top of the bibliography card as well as at the top of the note card. Next comes the complete citation for the note in bibliographic format, so you can arrange the cards alphabetically by author's last name. This arrangement is standard for any bibliography. Note the elements of the citation. These are in Turabian format, not MLA or APA. In particular, in Turabian, the date goes at the end. At the very bottom is location information, in this case the Library of Congress call number. You might say, what a waste of space, and you'd be right. What I've done in the past is to use 6 by 8 inch index cards for my bibliography cards, and then I've taken notes about the source in all of that extra space front and back. I've made an abstract, also called a rhetorical précis, of the source on the bibliography card that then helps me to understand where the work's interpretation fits into the literature, that is, the historiography. This is a note card. You'll see at the top left the author short title linked to the bibliography card, along with the page number indicating where this particular note came from. In the top right are keywords derived from an outline heading and a subheading, as well as a speculative heading just in case. This is followed by a note from the source author's claim relative to this note, thus establishing the interpretive context of the data that we'll look at now. And that data is a quote right here. It's only a partial sentence, so it begins with a 3-period ellipsis. An ellipsis are periods separated by spaces, one space between the beginning ellipsis and the first word. Note that the note taker has enclosed this entire quote in quotation marks. Following that is the note taker's own idea, bracketed and in this case italicized. Giving yourself distinct visual clues is key, regardless of what clues work for you. As I said earlier, I use brackets and insert my initials before writing out my own idea. I have responses for about half of the notes that I take. Finally, the note taker has added the book's call number, which, with the author and short title, makes retrieving the book easier if this note alone requires checking. These techniques translate almost completely into the digital world as well, as we'll see now. Now, a note about digital note-taking. Terminology in the digital world is very granular. So be aware that note-taking software and bibliographic management software might get confusing to you. Sometimes they're the same thing, and sometimes they're different. Thus it is with the product that I use that they're the same thing, Zotero, a so-called bibliographic management software with which I've both managed my sources and taken copious notes. And by copious, I mean in the thousands. Zotero is open source, free, and designed by historians, so I've used it since it first came out about 2008. It's an appendage to Firefox, though now it integrates with Chrome, and Zotero developers are pushing us toward using a desktop app. The downside is that there's not a fully functional Zotero app for the iPad. There is one third-party access app that works pretty well at this time. See Zotero.org for more information. You are not obliged to use this, and there are many other useful note-taking and bibliographic management tools out there. But let me show you what's up here. What you see in this slide is the desktop iteration for my Zotero account in 3 columns. To the left is my topical libraries and keyword tag library. That's at the lower left. I've opened my so-called Labor in World War I library, the sources for which you see in the middle column. Look now at the highlighted source, Effects of the Negro Migration on the South from 1921. Clicking that title reveals the full bibliographic information in the right-hand column. Let's look now at the note that I've made. Look at the red box. Clicking that reveals the note. It's a claim from page 426 followed by a quotation and my own response, literally a note to myself. See how the note is tagged with the source title called the parent item? And how the tags, really keywords, link to the list to the left. If I click any of the keywords, I can draw all the sources and notes tagged with it to the center column, from which I can make a topical report, which requires some finesse, and I'll mention it in a minute. One of the most useful functions of Zotero is that it produces reports. You can bundle all of the notes from a single source, similar to how you take notes in a notebook, in one report. You see in this example that the top third of the first page of notes has a full bibliographic information and then all the notes beneath it. You can create other types of reports, as I said. Two of the most helpful ones are reports of notes and sources by keyword tag. This one, like I said, requires a bit of finagling, but you just have to highlight all the appropriate notes and their sources, then run the report, which is available by right-clicking your mouse and telling it to run the report. You can even run a bibliographic report. Remember, if you do this, that the software alphabetizes titles by the first word it sees. It isn't smart enough yet to disregard a, an, or the in titles, so you'll have to make some corrections. Furthermore, no bibliographic management software will correct bad data, and you're responsible for the work that you turn in. In this lecture, we've covered why you should take notes from your sources, what notes should include, examples of index card bibliographic and content notes, and digital note-taking with the product Zotero. If you're a researcher who opens hard copies of books and articles as well as multiple internet browser windows when you write your paper, I hope you'll reconsider and use a comfortable but effective note-taking technique instead. Rigorous research requires information on the same topic from multiple sources that you compare and synthesize into your own thoughts that support your own claims. Anything else is just reporting what other people have said. This then ends the lecture. And as always, thank you for your attention.